let's go to another use case now. For decorators, we'll just open a new file. We can save it as use case 2 and just see another use case for decorators where we can have it. Alright, so the use case that I have in mind is counting function calls with decorators. Sometimes we would like to know how many times this function is called. So the number of times that the function is called by somebody, okay, whoever it may be, maybe in this file or maybe in some other file or something like that, we would want to keep storing a count of how many times this function has been called. So if that has to be done, we are going to use again a decorator this time to help us out. What will we do? Let's define for now, let's define two simple functions. Okay, let's define a single function. First of all, let's say succ, that is a successor function which will take in a parameter, which will take in a particular number and then put it in a local variable x or an object, and then it returns your x plus 1. That's it, right? And let's have another function. Let me call it as, a function which says, multiplication. Okay, a multiplication of, and it takes x comma y. It takes in two parameters. And what does it do? It returns, let's say it returns x multiplied by y. So mul of x comma y, it returns x comma y. Now, sometimes you might call this function, sometimes you might want to call this function. Now you would want to know sometimes how many times this function successor is called, how many times multiplication is called. Alright, so we need to have a decorator which will help in counting the number of functions. So let me say I have a def call underscore counter, which will be a decorator function which I'm going to call, or I'm going to pass the function, whichever calls it, that particular decorator. The function will be passed as a parameter, and then you will have a helper. Yes, that's what every decorator has for now. If you would know the syntax for the same. Now let's say this helper will can sometimes take in, okay, it can take in sometimes a function with one argument, or it can sometimes take a function with two arguments, which means I cannot define an helper just of one argument. I might want to define it with multiple arguments. Let's say star arguments, right? Sometimes I might be having some other function which says def, let me call it as add, and the function is going to take something like x comma but y, but this time it takes a default argument for y. Let's say y is equal to 1, a default argument, okay, and then it returns x plus y. Now comes a question, because you have a keyword argument out here, okay, you cannot just pass star args. You might sometimes want to take in as keyword arguments also, which you need to store it. Okay, what do I need to do? Any of the function calls helper or the decorator. Helper.calls, all you must do is you must add a 1 plus equal to 1, which will add a 1 to the helper.calls whenever the function is called. And all it should do is return. What should it return? It should return the function. That means it call the function with the arguments or with the keyword arguments. Hope that's clear, right? And we should return, okay, we should return the helper function too. That's what should be returned. Return the helper function or the helper reference. But there's one thing that will cause an error, that is helper.calls, you said plus equal to 1, which means helper.calls should have been initialized somewhere. Let's initialize it in the call counter itself outside helper. Okay, so I need to say helper.calls should be initialized to 0. Okay, you can initialize it even before def helper, but for now let's initialize it this way. Okay, now that's all. We need to just call the functions, right? Let's print succ of x, which means the successor of x sorry, let's call it successor of 10, which is going to be 11. You're going to pass a value 10. Or for now, let's do a for. Okay, so for I in range, let me start from 0 and go up till 10, or go up till 9, basically from 0 to 9, and then print the successor of I. After this, let me call for I in range. For I in range, let me say 15, or let me call it as, yeah, for I in range, I just want to print a table of 3. Okay, so for I in range, let me just have it till, this time I'll have it till 20, 3 into 20. Okay, so I want to return, I should be able to return 3 multiplied by I. Okay, that should be the value that's returned, table of 3. So I should be able to print here, let's say, table of 3, right? And over here I can say just printing successors of numbers from 0 to 9, calling. And finally you have it there. Let's say we print table of 3, we have for I in range. All right, and let's call add function. Let's call the add function only once, and let's just pass just one value, because y is an argument which can be taken by default. That's it. Of course I need to print add 4. So before, I can just say addition function. That's it. Not much explanation out here. Now I need to now print how many times each of them were called, right? That's what we need to do. So I need to print, first of all, I need to print successor was called how many times, successor.calls. I also need to print mul.calls, and I want to print add.calls. How many of them were called how many times? That's my main purpose. Function F5, enter. Oh, there's an error. Oh, that's going to be star keyword arguments. Return outside function, which means I did some, yeah, I did. Oh, what's that? Oh, not return. For I in range, we need to print. I'm so sorry. That's not in the function. Right. Okay, function object successor.calls. Okay, so we'll just come to that. First you have the successors, then you have the table of 3, then you have the addition function. But it says function object has no attribute calls. Successor.calls does not exist. That's what it says. Okay, so let's see, succ.calls. We created a helper.calls which would one second, you return helper. Oh, by the way, we created the decorator, but we didn't decorate successor multiplication addition, did we? No, we didn't. So we need to decorate. Of course, they're right in saying it's not done. So @call underscore counter, that's it. Just decorate. Now we're going to decorate all 3 functions with the same decorator, right? Because they're going to do that. Name func is not defined. Return f of, this is f which we have just taken. Return that particular function, or yeah, there we have. So it says addition function. Okay, so the first function was called how many times? 10 times. That's true. Successors. Multiplication, it was called many number of times, but it says 0. Okay, so why does it say 0? We can just check it out in some time. Mul.calls. We didn't call, oh, we didn't call mul. right? We just said 3 into I. We need to call mul with passing the two parameters, that is 3 comma I. There we are. We blundered up somewhere. Fine, now it's right. Successor was called 10 times, multiplication function 20 times, addition function 1 time. Okay, with this we are done with use cases for decorators. All right,